If you don't come out, you and the boy become a tragic statistic. Victor's cold voice echoed over the metallic clack of a shotgun being racked outside the decaying Montana cabin. He thought he had successfully cornered a desperate homeless mother, ready to burn us alive to force a $15,000 sale of this worthless property. He had no idea I was crouching in the darkness, clutching my terrified 7-year-old son and a heavy steel lockbox. Victor was about to set fire to the very evidence that would send his corporate empire to federal prison and the 1912 mining patent granting me absolute ownership of a $265 million subterranean fortune. Frost clung to the inside of the cracked windshield, forming jagged crystal patterns that obscured the gray Seattle morning. Charlotte Harper pulled the thin, moth-eaten sleeping bag tighter around her 7-year-old son, Toby. His small chest rose and fell in a steady rhythm, entirely unaware of the crushing weight of their reality. They had been living in the 1998 Volvo station wagon for 3 agonizing months, ever since the medical bills from Toby's severe respiratory infections had decimated her savings. And her former landlord, a man named Richard Henderson, had handed her an eviction notice with a sympathetic but entirely immovable frown. Every bone in Charlotte's body ached. The driver's seat was permanently stuck, leaning backward, and the biting Pacific Northwest chill seemed to seep directly into her soul. She checked her wallet in the dim light of dawn. $430, enough for 2 plain oatmeal cups at the gas station and maybe a cheap coffee. After warming up the car, praying the failing alternator wouldn't finally give out, she drove to the local post office. Charlotte maintained a P.O. box at the Mount Baker branch, her last tether to a documented existence. Terrified that losing a permanent mailing address would trigger a child welfare investigation, she left Toby dozing in the locked car, keeping the vehicle in her line of sight as she walked inside. Box 412 was usually empty, save for the occasional collection notice from Seattle General Hospital. Today, however, a yellow slip of paper rested against the glass. Certified mail. Confused and heart-pounding with the fear of another lawsuit, Charlotte approached the counter. The postal clerk, an older woman named Mrs. Higgins, handed over a thick cream-colored envelope. The return address read Kensington and Royce Associates, Attorneys at Law, Helena, Montana. Charlotte tore it open right there in the lobby. Inside was a stack of dense legal documents and a cover letter typed on expensive watermarked paper. Her eyes scanned the text, struggling to process the formal jargon. Dear Miss Harper, we regret to inform you of the passing of your great-uncle Nathaniel Bradley. As the sole surviving blood relative listed in his probate files, you have been named the primary beneficiary of his estate filed under Missoula County Probate Court Docket Number 84A. The primary asset is a parcel of land and a residential structure located in the Bitterroot Valley. You are required to claim the deed in person. Charlotte stopped breathing. Nathaniel Bradley. She had only met the man once when she was a little girl, a gruff, solitary figure who smelled of pine needles and stale tobacco, who had vanished into the Montana wilderness decades ago. She had entirely forgotten he existed. A residential structure, a house. Tears pricked her eyes. It didn't matter if it was a mansion or a shack. It was a roof. It was walls. It was an address. It was a place where Toby could plug in his nebulizer without draining the car battery. But getting to Montana required gas money she didn't have. Desperation breeds ingenuity. Over the next 48 hours, Charlotte sold her phone to a pawn shop on 4th Avenue for $60. She sold her winter coat, her spare tire, and a set of silver earrings David, her absent ex-husband, had given her years ago. She amassed exactly $142. It had to be enough. The drive was a grueling, white-knuckle nightmare. The Volvo overheated twice, climbing the Snoqualmie Pass. They slept in rest stops, huddled together, eating cold canned beans and crackers. Throughout the journey, Charlotte kept the letter on the dashboard like a beacon of hope. She visualized a quaint rustic log cabin with a smoking chimney, a place to start over. On the evening of the 3rd day, the GPS coordinates led them down a severely rutted, overgrown dirt road deep in the Bitterroot Mountains. The towering pines blocked out the setting sun, casting long, menacing shadows. Finally, the car broke through the tree line into a small clearing. Charlotte slammed on the brakes. The Volvo sputtered and died. There stood Nathaniel Bradley's residential structure. Charlotte's heart plummeted into her stomach. It was a ruin. The cabin was a rotting, dilapidated wooden box that looked one stiff breeze away from total collapse. Half of the corrugated tin roof had caved in, leaving a gaping hole exposed to the sky. The front porch was a treacherous jumble of splintered planks, and the windows were boarded up with gray, weather-beaten plywood. Nature was slowly swallowing the building whole. Thick vines of ivy and creeping moss choked the exterior walls. "Mommy," Toby asked quietly from the back seat, his voice laced with confusion. "Is this our new house?" Charlotte gripped the steering wheel so hard her knuckles turned white. The sheer, devastating disappointment physically hurt. She had dragged her son across 3 states, sold everything of value, chased a phantom hope, and ended up in a condemned shack in the middle of nowhere. "It just needs a little work, baby," Charlotte lied, her voice cracking. She rested her forehead against the cold steering wheel, and for the first time since she lost her apartment, she let herself cry. The next morning, Charlotte was violently awakened by the crunch of heavy tires on gravel. She bolted upright in the driver's seat. Through the fogged windows, she saw a pristine jet-black Lincoln Navigator pull into the muddy clearing, looking aggressively out of place. 2 men stepped out. The first was a man in his late 50s wearing a sharply tailored gray suit, carrying a leather briefcase. The second was a younger, heavily built man in a sleek trench coat whose expensive Italian leather shoes immediately sank into the Montana mud. Charlotte unlocked the car door, stepping out into the biting morning air, instinctively standing between the strangers and the Volvo, where Toby was still sleeping. "Charlotte Harper?" the older man asked, extending a hand. "I'm Harrison Miller. We spoke on the phone briefly. I'm the executor of Nathaniel Bradley's estate." Charlotte hesitantly shook his hand. "You didn't mention the house was a condemned ruin, Mr. Miller." Harrison Miller offered a tight, practiced smile. "I assure you, Miss Harper, the probate court merely deals in legal definitions. A structure with walls and a foundation is classified as a residence. However, I am not here to burden you with this eyesore. Allow me to introduce Mr. Victor Langdon." The younger man stepped forward, flashing a brilliant, entirely synthetic smile. "Ms. Harper, a pleasure. I represent Apex Mineral Holdings. We purchased distressed properties in the valley for land rehabilitation and conservation." Charlotte crossed her arms, shivering in her thin sweater. "Conservation out here?" "Exactly," Victor said smoothly. "To be frank, your great-uncle's cabin is a massive liability. If a hiker wanders onto this property and the roof collapses on them, you are personally responsible. The county is already preparing to hit you with fines for code violations. But seeing as you've traveled a long way, my company is prepared to do you a favor." Victor reached into his designer coat and pulled out a checkbook. "We are offering you $15,000 cash right now. You sign the quitclaim deed. The liability becomes mine, and you can drive back to civilization with a very comfortable safety net." Charlotte stared at the pen in Victor's hand. $15,000. Her mind raced. That was first and last month's rent on a beautiful apartment. That was a reliable used car. That was fresh groceries, new winter clothes for Toby, and a real bed. It was a lifeline thrown to a drowning woman. All she had to do was sign away a pile of rotting wood. But as she looked closer, something felt deeply wrong. Victor was trying too hard to appear casual. His jaw was clenched tight. Harrison Miller, the lawyer, was shifting his weight nervously from foot to foot, avoiding her gaze. Why would a corporate representative from an allegedly massive holding company drive hours into the deep woods at dawn just to hand-deliver a $15,000 check for a worthless piece of land? And why the intense, barely concealed urgency in Victor's eyes? "I just got here," Charlotte said slowly, stepping back. "I want to look inside the cabin first. I want to see what my uncle left." Victor's fake smile faltered, a flash of genuine irritation crossing his features. "Miss Harper, let's be reasonable. The structure is unsafe. There is black mold, rot, and God knows what else in there. Take the money." "No," Charlotte said, her voice finding a sudden, solid core of strength. "I want 24 hours. I'll let you know tomorrow." Victor stared at her, his eyes hardening into something cold and predatory. He slowly put the checkbook back into his coat. "The offer is on the table until tomorrow morning, Miss Harper. But understand this. Out here, bad things happen to abandoned properties. Fires mostly. It would be a shame to see you walk away with nothing. It was a blatant threat. Before Charlotte could respond, Victor turned on his heel, motioning for Miller to follow. They climbed back into the Navigator and sped off, kicking up a spray of muddy water. Charlotte stood alone in the silence of the woods, her heart hammering against her ribs. She turned to look at the dilapidated cabin. What is so special about this place? Using a tire iron from the Volvo's trunk, Charlotte shattered the rusted padlock on the heavy oak front door. She pushed it open. The hinges screamed in protest. The interior smelled of damp earth, decaying wood, and ancient dust. The single main room was a graveyard of broken furniture. A rusted cast iron stove sat in the corner, and a massive fieldstone fireplace dominated the far wall. Sunlight pierced through the hole in the roof, illuminating motes of dust dancing in the dead air. She brought Toby inside, wrapping him in the sleeping bag and sitting him on a relatively clean patch of the hardwood floor near the hearth. "Stay right here, okay, buddy? I'm going to look around." Charlotte began to search. She checked the moldy kitchen cabinets, pulling out nothing but fossilized rat droppings and rusted tin cans. She dug through a ruined dresser in the back corner. Nothing, just rot and ruin. Hours passed. The sun began to dip behind the mountains again, plunging the cabin into a creeping, chilly gloom. Charlotte's stomach growled violently. She was exhausted, hungry, and starting to wonder if her paranoia had just cost her $15,000. "Mommy!" Toby's voice echoed in the quiet room. Charlotte turned. Toby was kneeling by the massive stone fireplace. "Toby, don't play with that. It's dirty," Charlotte scolded gently, walking over. "The floor is wobbly," Toby said innocently, pointing to a thick oak floorboard directly abutting the hearthstone. Charlotte frowned. She knelt beside him, pressing her hands against the wood. It gave slightly under her weight, making a hollow thud. Unlike the other boards, which were nailed down with rusted iron spikes, this one had wooden pegs that looked deliberately fashioned to be removable. Grabbing the tire iron, Charlotte jammed the flat end into the seam of the wood and pulled back with all her remaining strength. The wood groaned, cracked, and suddenly popped free. A rush of stale, metallic-smelling air wafted up from the dark cavity beneath the floor. Charlotte peered into the shadows. Resting in the dirt between the floor joists was a large, heavy steel lockbox. It was wrapped in thick layers of oilcloth, which had preserved the metal from the dampness of the earth. With trembling hands, Charlotte reached down and hauled the box out. It weighed at least 40 pounds. Setting it on the floorboards, she saw it was sealed with a heavy brass combination padlock, but taped to the top of the box was a small yellowed envelope with her name written on it in shaky cursive handwriting. To Charlotte. She tore the envelope open. Inside was a single index card with 3 numbers, 143208. Her breath hitched. She spun the dials on the brass lock, 14328. The lock clicked heavily and popped open. Charlotte pulled the latch back and lifted the heavy steel lid. The box wasn't filled with cash, and it wasn't filled with gold bars. It was packed to the brim with paperwork, thick-bound ledgers, old geological survey maps, and stacks of documents stamped with the seal of the Federal Reserve Bank of San Francisco. Charlotte pulled out the top document. It was a bound leather folio. She opened it to the first page. It was an original, fully authenticated mining patent, dated 1912, updated and legally reinforced by a federal judge in 1994. She read the heavily underlined text, her eyes widening with every word. Nathaniel Bradley didn't just own the 3 acres of surface dirt. He owned the absolute, unchallengeable subsurface mineral rights to the entire surrounding valley basin, over 12,000 acres of underground claims. Attached to the deed was a modern geological assay report from an independent firm, commissioned just months before Nathaniel's death. Confirmed subterranean deposits, Sector 4, the report read. Density analysis indicates an unmined, ultra-high-grade lithium and palladium vein extending approximately 4 miles beneath the primary claim. Estimated gross baseline extraction value, $265 million. Charlotte dropped the paper as if it burned her fingers. $265 million. Victor Langdon didn't want the cabin. He wanted the dirt beneath it. And for $15,000, he had almost stolen $250 million. Before Charlotte could even process the magnitude of what she was holding, a sharp, sudden noise shattered the silence of the cabin. Outside, A heavy engine rumbled to a halt. Headlights flooded the gaps in the boarded-up windows. Doors slammed. Heavy boots hit the gravel, and the distinct, terrifying metallic clack of a shotgun being racked echoed through the mountain air. Victor Langdon hadn't waited until morning. He had come back to ensure the cabin, and whoever was inside it, would disappear forever. Footsteps crunched heavily against the loose gravel outside the ruined cabin. Inside, Charlotte's maternal instinct violently overrode her exhaustion. She didn't scream. She didn't freeze. She grabbed the heavy canvas backpack she had brought from the Volvo, shoved the thick leather folio, the assay reports, and the corroded lockbox inside, and yanked the zipper shut. She threw the straps over her shoulders, the 40 pounds of steel and paper pressing heavily against her spine. "Mommy," Toby whispered, his voice trembling as the glaring headlights sliced through the gaps in the plywood. "Shoo," Charlotte breathed, pulling him tightly against her chest. "We are playing a hiding game now, Toby." Absolute silence. Not a single sound. Outside, Victor Langdon's voice cut through the frigid mountain air, dropping the polite corporate facade entirely. "Miss Harper, I know you're in there. Your rusted-out wagon is still sitting in the mud." A heavy thud echoed as someone kicked the side of the Volvo. "Out here in the Bitterroot, the fire response time is roughly 45 minutes. Tragically, old wooden structures with faulty stoves go up in flames all the time. Come out now. Hand over whatever you found in there. Take the 15 grand and you walk away. If you don't, you and the boy become a tragic statistic." Charlotte backed away from the front door, her eyes scanning the shadows. The front was blocked. The Volvo was useless. They were trapped in a wooden tinderbox. "Boy, douse the porch," Victor commanded coldly. The pungent, sickening scent of raw gasoline quickly seeped beneath the front door. Panic clawed at Charlotte's throat, but she forced it down, her mind racing with a singular, desperate focus. She looked at the boarded-up window at the rear of the cabin, positioned directly behind the massive stone fireplace. It was their only blind spot. She guided Toby to the back wall. Using the iron fireplace poker Toby had played with earlier, she wedged the flattened tip under the edge of the rotting plywood covering the window. She threw her entire body weight against the iron rod. The rusted nails screamed as they fought the leverage, but the decaying wood finally splintered and gave way with a sharp crack. "What was that?" Victor barked from the front. "Light it. Light it right now." A bright, violent flash of orange illuminated the front of the cabin, followed by the deafening whoosh of accelerated fire. Intense heat instantly radiated through the thin front walls, and thick, choking black smoke began billowing through the floorboards. Charlotte kicked the remaining plywood free, exposing the dense, dark woods behind the cabin. She hoisted Toby up, pushing him through the narrow window frame before scrambling through herself. She hit the damp earth hard, scraping her hands on the rocks, the heavy backpack driving the breath from her lungs. "Run," she hissed, grabbing Toby's hand. They plunged into the tree line just as the interior of the cabin became an inferno. The dry, rotted timber caught with terrifying speed. The fire roared like a jet engine, casting chaotic, dancing shadows deep into the forest. Charlotte dragged Toby through the thick underbrush, moving in a wide arc around the clearing. She needed to get them miles away, but Toby was already wheezing from the smoke and the cold. They would never survive a foot chase through the mountains at night. As they circled back toward the access road, Charlotte peered through the pine branches. The clearing was illuminated as bright as day by the raging fire. Victor and his hired muscle, a massive man holding a pump-action shotgun, were standing near the tree line, watching the flames consume the front porch, their backs completely turned to the dirt road. Parked at the edge of the clearing, facing the exit, was Victor's pristine black Lincoln Navigator. The engine was idling. A steady cloud of white exhaust plumed from the tailpipe. In his arrogance, Victor had left the heat running. It was a suicidal gamble, but it was their only chance. "Toby, listen to me," Charlotte whispered fiercely, kneeling in the mud. "When I say go, you run to the back door of that black car, climb in, and get on the floor. Do not look up." Toby nodded, tears streaming down his soot-stained cheeks. Charlotte took a deep breath, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She waited for a massive section of the cabin's roof to collapse. As the timbers caved in with a deafening crash, sending a geyser of sparks into the night sky and momentarily blinding the two men. Charlotte screamed, "Go!" They sprinted from the bushes. Toby scrambled into the rear passenger door while Charlotte threw herself into the driver's seat. The interior smelled of expensive leather and rich cologne. The keys were gleaming in the ignition. Charlotte slammed the gearshift into drive and stomped on the accelerator. The massive SUV roared, its tires spinning wildly in the mud for a fraction of a second before finding traction. The vehicle surged forward, fishtailing violently as she aimed it down the dark, rutted access road. "Hey!" Victor's enraged scream pierced the night. A shotgun blast shattered the quiet, the heavy slugs tearing through the upper canopy of the trees just inches above the navigator's roof. But it was too late. The heavy SUV was already barreling down the mountain path, plunging into the safety of the darkness. Charlotte kept the accelerator pinned, her hands locked in a death grip on the steering wheel, driving like a woman possessed. She didn't slow down until they hit the paved highway miles below. Only then did she look in the rearview mirror. Toby was curled up on the plush floor mats, perfectly safe, bathed in the warm air of the vehicle's climate control. Charlotte let out a ragged, trembling breath. She had the documents. She had the car. Now she had the power. The sun was rising over the city of Missoula when Charlotte pulled the stolen Navigator into the parking garage of a towering glass and steel office building. She had spent the last 4 hours parked behind a 24-hour diner, using the SUV's dome light to meticulously read every single page inside Nathaniel's lockbox. She hadn't just found wealth. She had found a weapon. Among the geological assays and deeds was a secondary folder. It contained private correspondence between Nathaniel Bradley and a highly respected federal magistrate, alongside photographs of illegal toxic waste dumping. Apex Mineral Holdings wasn't just trying to steal a lithium fortune. They were aggressively trying to buy the land to bury evidence of a massive environmental disaster they had caused on the adjacent property. If the EPA found out, it wouldn't just bankrupt Apex. It would send their executives to federal prison. Nathaniel had been building a whistleblower case before his sudden, suspicious heart failure. Charlotte checked the directory in the building's lobby. She was looking for the name printed on the legal stationery inside Nathaniel's secondary folder. Wright, Sterling and Vance, corporate litigation. The letterhead had specifically belonged to Thomas Wright, senior partner. Despite her stain-covered clothes, unwashed hair, and exhausted appearance, Charlotte walked into the opulent, mahogany-paneled reception area of the law firm with the unshakable posture of a billionaire. "I need to see Thomas Wright," Charlotte told the pristine receptionist. "Do you have an appointment, ma'am?" the receptionist asked, her eyes darting nervously to Charlotte's muddy boots. "Tell him Nathaniel Bradley's heir is here, and tell him I have the Sector 4 assay reports." Less than 2 minutes later, Charlotte was sitting in a sprawling corner office. Thomas Wright, a sharp-eyed man in his 60s with silver hair and a meticulously tailored navy suit, stared in absolute, stunned silence at the documents spread across his glass desk. "I've been looking for these for 3 years, Thomas murmured, running a hand over his mouth. "When Nathaniel died, Harrison Miller, a corrupt, bottom-feeding probate lawyer, sealed the estate. We knew Apex was trying to force a blind sale, but without the original deeds, our hands were tied." Thomas looked up at Charlotte, a profound respect dawning in his eyes. "You have no idea what you've walked away with, Miss Harper." "I think I do," Charlotte said, her voice steady and cold. "Victor Langdon tried to burn my son and me alive last night. I left his car in your parking garage. I want him in handcuffs by noon, and I want my land." The corporate lawyer smiled, a sharp, dangerous expression. "Miss Harper, it would be my absolute privilege." The trap snapped shut with devastating speed. Thomas Wright immediately initiated a conference call with the regional director of the FBI and the EPA's Criminal Investigation Division, transferring digital scans of Nathaniel's evidence. Because Charlotte had the original court-certified patent deeds, she was immediately recognized as the legal, uncontested owner of the 12,000 acres of subterranean rights. At 11:30 a.m., Victor Langdon and Harrison Miller marched into the Missoula County Courthouse carrying forged quitclaim deeds they intended to file, claiming the cabin had burned down in a tragic accident and the estate was officially absorbed by Apex Mineral Holdings. Instead of a clerk, they were greeted by 3 armed federal agents. The ensuing legal bloodbath made national headlines. Apex Mineral Holdings was raided by federal authorities. Victor Langdon was indicted on a staggering list of charges: attempted murder and arson, corporate fraud and extortion, violations of the Clean Water Act, conspiracy to commit probate fraud. Harrison Miller immediately flipped, trading his testimony against Victor for a reduced sentence in a white-collar federal penitentiary. As for Charlotte, the revelation of the ultra-high-grade lithium and palladium vein triggered a massive bidding war among legitimate global tech and mining conglomerates. With Thomas Wright negotiating ruthlessly on her behalf, Charlotte didn't just sell the land. She leased the extraction rights. She secured an upfront, untaxable signing bonus of $45 million, along with a guaranteed 7% gross royalty on all minerals extracted over the next 50 years. The estimated lifetime value of the contract easily exceeded the initial $265 million projection. 6 months later, the freezing Seattle rain felt like a distant nightmare. Charlotte sat on the expansive, sun-drenched patio of a breathtaking, custom-built estate overlooking the Pacific Ocean in Carmel, California. The air was warm, and the scent of salt water mixed with the blooming jasmine in her immaculate gardens. Down on the manicured lawn, Toby was running freely, chasing a golden retriever puppy. His cheeks were flushed and healthy, his respiratory issues completely resolved thanks to world-class medical care and the clean ocean air. He laughed, a bright, ringing sound that filled the estate. Charlotte took a sip of her coffee, looking out at the horizon. In the climate-controlled, secure 6-car garage beneath the house, parked next to a sleek new Range Rover, sat a rusted 1998 Volvo station wagon. She had paid $10,000 to have it flatbed down from Seattle. She kept it there as a monument, a reminder of the freezing nights, the $4 in her wallet, and the absolute lowest point of her life. It was a reminder that the world could be impossibly cruel, but that a mother fighting for her child's survival could outsmart predators, walk through fire, and claim an empire. Her phone buzzed on the glass table. It was an automated notification from her wealth management firm. Another monthly royalty dividend of $400,000 had just cleared. Charlotte smiled, turned her phone on silent, and went down to play with her son. If you were captivated by Charlotte's incredible journey from a freezing car to a $250 million empire, don't forget to hit that like button. Share this video with someone who needs a reminder that fortunes can change overnight. Subscribe to our channel and ring the bell for more jaw-dropping true-life stories of hidden treasures, shocking twists, and ultimate revenge. What would you do with $200 million? Let us know in the comments below.